Hej och välkomna till Udda Ting, en podcast om sällsamma historier, kreativitet och kreatörerna själva. Jag heter Henrik Möller, musiken är skapad av Testbild och loggan till podden är gjord av Malmökonstnären Klaus Kinski. Det här avsnittet ska handla om den ökände skådespelaren och senare regissören Klaus Kinski. Det här var inte planerat att göra ett avsnitt om Kinski, men när jag intervjuade Troy Howarth om Fulci så visade det sig att han hade skrivit en bok om Kinski. Så på den vägen blev det. Jag talar faktiskt en del om Kinski i Udda Ting-avsnittet om Werner Herzog, så de delarna kommer jag inte att ta med här. Kinski hade ju ett rykte om sig att vara okontrollerbar och galen. Och jag började fundera på, för länge sedan då, om det var en bluff, alltså någonting han spelade. Ända tills jag fick ett förstahandsvittnes beskrivning av vansinnet. Jag pratade alltså med stuntmannen Roy Scamell, mest känd för sina stunts i Alien, A Clockwork Orange och Full Metal Jacket av Stanley Kubrick. Han var bekant med Kinski och berättade bland annat en historia när de var i Marocko tillsammans för en filminspelning och en tullare hade rotat runt i Kinskis pedant packade väska. Kinski hade fått ett raseriutbrott och smält ner locket på tullarens fingrar. Kaos hade utbrytit och Scamell hade blivit tvungen att ingripa när en vakt skulle slå Kinski i huvudet med en batong. Resultatet blev att Scamell fick en pistolkolv i nacken och blev den som polisen arresterade istället för Kinski. Scamell hade fått spendera en natt i ett marockanskt fängelse och Kinski hade inte ens orkat komma lösa ut honom förrän nästa dag. Scamell var sur såklart och Kinski hade bjudit på en grogg i baren som plåster på såren. Deras vänskapsconnection hade bisarrt nog handlat om hästar. För både Scamell och Kinski älskade hästar och i den här marockanska filmen så blev det många scener med ridande och stunts till häst. En annan anekdot var att Kinski i en intervju hade blivit tillfrågad om varför han aldrig hade spelat Hitler i en film. Han var ju ändå tysk, menade de. Varpå Kinski snabbt hade fått ett utbrott och skrikit "If I would have played Hitler, I would have been better than Hitler!" Bättre än Hitler? Mycket intressant uttalande. Kinski skrev en självbiografi vars titel var All I Need Is Love på engelska. Den blev snabbt indragen och fick flera sidor censurerade. När den senare släpptes igen på engelska med flera sidor bortplockade fick den ironisk titeln Kinski Uncut. Jag frågade Troy Howarth som hade skrivit boken Real Depravities, The Films of Klaus Kinski, vad det var för någonting som hade censurerats i den här andra utgåvan. What was removed from the book? What were those missing pages?
He claimed to have had a liaison with Marlene Dietrich. She was not amused and she threatened to sue. He made some very disparaging comments about Roman Polanski. In any version, he doesn't speak very well about anybody. Kinski didn't seem to be a particularly warm and cuddly man. He tended to really, he had a lot of anger in him. And so a lot of the things that he commented on, he originally said in the book that he had a threesome with Maria Rome and Margaret Lee, probably during the making of Venus and Furs. Maria Rome did a foreword for my book, and she talked to me about this and said that was completely ridiculous, and she was very hurt and very angry when she heard this, and she thought about suing him, and then she just decided, well, that's just Klaus, I'm just going to have to accept it. So she did not sue him, but she kind of cooled off her friendship with him for a little while, although she eventually forgave him. He just made so many outrageous claims and so many outrageous statements that a lot of people threatened lawsuits, and so a lot of things were cut, names were changed, and things that are in the book originally had different people's names attached to them.
Jag ska läsa ett kort stycke från Kinskis självbiografi när han beskriver Werner Herzog och inspelningsförhållandena under Fitzcarraldo. Once again, we lack the barest necessities to keep up our strength and ward off dangerous diseases. Once again, we lack fruit, vegetables, and especially drinking water. Mine is the only contract to stipulate the daily ration of lemons, papayas, and mineral water. And I, the only one to avoid eating that swill Herzog supplies. Whenever possible, I catch fish in the river or shoot wildfowl and roast them on a wood fire. The instant Herzog smells the roast, he sticks to me like a fly to dung, and he tries to eat up my food. No matter how much I curse, insult, or even threaten him, the moment he wants something from me, he's here, like malaria, like the stench billowing out of a pile of shit. He's the same decaying garbage heap he was 10 years ago, only more moronic, more mindless, more murderous. Once again, Herzog and his cameraman go for weeks without washing. Once again, their clothes are stiff with filth. Not soil, not mud, not clay. No, filth! Exclamation mark. Their own filth. For hygienic reasons, the thin leather over the rubber edge of the viewfinder normally ought to be changed daily. But it's not changed for weeks, no, months. So it's covered with this blackish grayish slime, and it stinks so unbearable I can't even go near the camera. Furthermore, they're all disgustingly lazy and voracious. They're still asleep at 8 or 9 a.m. in the morning, whereas the jungle dawns at 3, and its wondrous and enchanting light reveals creation in all its mysterious power and purity. Ja, som ni ser, det krävs inte något geni för att fatta att det här är ren ut lögn och vansinne från Kinskis sida. Kinski's autobiography is really something else. Probably the most insane autobiography ever written. Constantly vulgar and over the top. There are so many crazy stories about Kinski that it more often than not drowns out his talents as an actor.
One of the things that I wanted to do with my book was actually not go into that so much, because there's been so much talk about that. I just wanted to focus on his work as an actor. But I don't mind talking about it. I mean, certainly these stories are all public knowledge, and one of my favorite stories, about him and about the way that he could be was just the legendary stories of him and Oliver Reed on the set of Venom. They hated each other, and Oliver Reed loved to get Kinski worked up. And so when Kinski would go into his trailer in between scenes, Oliver Reed, who was a big man, would go over to the trailer and start shaking it back and forth and say, "Get out here, you Nazi bastard." And Kinski would come out just, flames shooting from his eyes, and you fucking English cunt. And they would just scream and yell at each other and yell obscenities and everything else. And at one point there was some visiting, I don't know if it was royalty, but some very important people visiting the set, and the director was showing them around, and all of a sudden Kinski and Oliver Reed comes striding by, and Kinski's running after him, just yelling these obscenities, and the director says, "Okay, maybe we should go somewhere else." Stories like that. I mean, there's all the infamous stories that Werner Herzog tells. I don't know if they're all true or not. I mean, Herzog is a very good storyteller, and it could be that he's being unfair. He might be lying about some of it. I don't know. That was part of the reason I didn't want to get into focusing on that in my book about Kinski, because he's not around to tell his side of the story anymore. Uli Lomel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the man who directed The Tenderness of Wolves, amongst other things, directed Kinski in a movie called Revenge of the Stolen Stars. And he had Kinski on the film, I think, for 2 days. And Kinski only had to do a dialogue scene at a table. And, they did all the setup. They had the microphones in place and everything is all ready to go. And Kinski comes onto the set and he sits down and he looks up and he says, "What is this?" And the director says, "Well, that's the microphone, Klaus. You've made movies before. You know what that is." He says, "I don't want that up there. Get it away from me." "Well, Klaus, we're recording." So, "I don't care. Take it away or I'm going away." Okay, so they spend all this time and they rig up a microphone somewhere on the chair. So they bring him back out and Kinski sits down and he says, "There's still something not right here." And he slams his fist down as hard as he could on the chair, virtually almost shattered the eardrums of the poor sound technician. The guy's like, "Son of a bitch did that on purpose. He knew it was there." So they change it once again, and they get it to a point where Kinski finally decides, okay, I'm ready to do the scene now. He does the scene, no problem. And Malone says, "Okay, well, just stay there, Klaus, and we're going to switch to another position, and I'm going to get it from a different angle." "Well, I don't feel like sitting in that chair anymore." "What do you mean you don't feel like sitting in that chair anymore? You've got to." He says, No, I'm not going to sit in the chair anymore. You're going to have to figure it out." So this continues all day long. He will not stay in one position. He will not cooperate in any way, shape, or form. So finally the director says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to end up killing this guy. He's driving us all insane. He had a brainstorm. He said, I know what I'm going to tell him. So he goes up to Kinski and he says, Klaus, I've decided from now on you're playing a ghost. That way you can be anywhere you want to be. It doesn't matter. Continuity is no longer important. And Kinski just looked at him and said, you're a genius. From now on, I'm only going to be directed by you. I love you. And that was it. And if you see the film, you'll see he's here one moment, he's there another moment. And it was him at that point. By that point, this is in the late 80s, he was completely out of control. He was no longer even remotely professional in many respects. He just reached a point where nobody could manage him anymore.
Yes, after his death, his medical records came into public domain, and it turned out he had schizophrenia.
He had that. I think also, I would assume it was the 80s. There was a lot of cocaine around. I think adding cocaine into the system, somebody who definitely had a mental health issue, added immensely to his problems. I think he really was he was out of control.
But what was this obsession with Paganini?
He said many times, he believed that he was the reincarnation of Paganini. The spirit of Paganini was within him. Now, did he really believe that, or was he just saying that for publicity? I don't know. Maybe he really did believe it. It's interesting. He would give these interviews where he disparaged Werner Herzog as a no-talent hack. The only reason that Herzog's movies are any good is because of me. When I'm in his movies, they're good. When I'm not in them, they're shit. He tried to get Herzog to direct Paganini. So what does that tell you? I mean, obviously, he knew that Herzog was no talent hack. Herzog took one look at that script and said, this is not filmable. I can't do this. And he knew, if I'm going to try to direct Kinski in his passion project, this is not going to go well. So he refused. He ran the other way, wouldn't do it. Kinski ended up directing it. And it was a miserable experience for him. Unfortunately, the budget was slashed. Basically, the film was put together. It was unreleasable. It had to keep being edited, re-edited, cut down. And there was just, if you've seen the film, you know it's not a commercial film.
I saw the film in Berlin in 2006 at a Kinski festival, and people left the theater one by one until it was only like 4 people left in the audience. The film was that boring, that terrible. But I have to say that the film does have its moments, thanks to Kinski, especially the ending where Kinski plays the violin so furiously and hysterically that he slashes his own throat. In the behind-the-scenes material, there is a scene where Kinski directs himself giving a woman oral sex in take after take, in different angles, with eccentric, almost hysterical directions to the cameraman, and moving the woman around on the bed with eccentric gestures. And you wonder, what the hell is he trying to achieve?
It's a completely insane movie. It makes very little sense. It's very stream of consciousness. And it's not the sort of movie you can imagine an audience sitting there eating their popcorn and watching it. It's something for the diehard Kinski fans. And it's not a movie I plan to revisit many times, but I'm certainly, obviously, I recognize its importance to him. But I think that he needed some help. I'd put it that way. I think he needed some help with the script, and I think he needed somebody to direct it who knew how to control him. If Herzog could have found some way to have made that film with him, I think it would have turned out to be something special. But as it is, it's a very bizarre movie. We'll just put it that way.
I don't know much about the real Paganini, but do you know what he did change in the script?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall all the specific changes that he made. This is Paganini according to Kinski, and at what point he developed this fixation on the story, I don't know. At what point he developed this obsession that he was a reincarnation of Paganini, I don't know. It was something that I think, Paganini, in a way, not to sound too flippant about it, you could regard him as almost being the first rock star. And he plays that aspect in the movie. You'll see the way that the women react to his playing. The very intense playing that he would do offended the very prim and very uptight society. But the women were just, absolutely turned on by this and just regarded him as some kind of a sex object. And I think he liked that, and I think that's how he fancied himself. And going back to his time doing theater work and so forth, and of course we know about his infamous Jesus tour, how he interacted with the audience there. Although, in fairness, if you've ever seen the documentary about that, a lot of the audience, a lot of the audience was very disrespectful to him, and no performer should have to put up with that sort of thing. So I think that might have been how he came to relate with that. I think he liked that idea of somebody who was pushing the boundaries of performance art. And he saw himself in the same way, and that's how he saw Paganini, so the two became conflated for him.
Yes, the way he manically starts over again and again every time someone in the audience interrupts him by making the slightest noise. And this is a big arena, a show with thousands of people, so you can imagine how impossible that would be. And at the end, hours and hours later, Kinski is left with like 10 to 5% of the audience. Everyone else is left, and someone interrupts him again. He's really tired and he goes like, for fuck's sake, shut up, and he starts over again. It's really tragic comedy.
He was the main draw. He was the star attraction. He was what everybody was there to see. He was kind of like the wild circus animal that they were paying to see. You go to a concert, there's usually an opening band or whatever, but you're there for the primary name. So he was the name, he was the star attraction, and his reputation preceded him. So as you see in the documentary, they taunt him, they yell at him, they provoke him, and maybe he didn't handle it very well, but again, I mean, what actor would want to go out on stage and have people yelling insults at them? That's just disrespectful.
I've seen the documentary on the Jesus tour, and Kinski was a big star, a big name. His name was all over the posters, all over the city. He must have been extremely famous at that time.
In Germany, certainly very famous, very famous. He had been acting since the late 40s. He had not really become a name until the 60s, but he was a star by that point. I'm trying to remember. He did the Jesus tour right before he went to do Aguirre. So Aguirre helped to put him up even another notch. I think the Herzog, I think it's probably true to say if it weren't for his movies with Werner Herzog, he would not be remembered as well as he is. Yeah, he did, because Herzog commented about how he brought that with him. He was kind of a defeated Jesus, as he put it. So he had a tendency to sort of lapse into talking like Jesus at times.
Okay, back to Paganini. In the behind-the-scenes material for Paganini, you clearly see Kinski treating the actors differently. There's a scene with an elder, distinguished actor that Kinski treats very respectfully. So he could if he wanted to.
He respected actors. I think it was directors who really pissed him off. He would say over and over again, how can a director direct me how to die? Have they died? No, they don't know anything about that, so just shut up and leave me alone. He hated directors. I think that was the big thing. So I think the fact that he was directing, if he had, there were some distinguished actors in that film, yeah, he probably did treat them with great respect, I'm sure. And he was aware of the fact that they had that experience, and he was going to treat them with respect. Also because he felt that he had been disrespected many times, so I'm sure he didn't want to do the same thing to them. The interesting part is just Kinski himself. I mean, it's his incredible charisma as an actor. There was nobody else like him. He was very contemptuous about acting and about filmmaking. He would say over and over again, I'm just a whore. I do whatever, if they pay me, I come and I do it. And he expected to be paid top dollar. He insisted over and over again that he had turned down Kurosawa, he had turned down Fellini, he had turned down Ken Russell, he had turned down Ingmar Bergman, he turned down Luchino Visconti. He said, I don't care about these people and their names and their reputation. If they're not going to pay me what I want, I'm not going to do it. So he did all these crappy movies because they were willing to pay him. And usually he would work on them only for a few days. And very often, it was true. It was because they couldn't handle him for more than just a few days. So with Paganini, you have Kinski full frame, center of the frame from beginning to end pretty much. So if you're a Kinski fan, it's fascinating on that level. It's as much of him as you're going to see in any movie. And I don't know that I think it's one of his great performances, but I think it's a great sort of celebration of his screen presence, something that nobody else has. He had a vision. I mean, you got to give him credit. He had a vision. Whether it was the right vision or not, I don't know. I don't think anybody can make that determination. He was very, very aware of the fact that he was making the film that he wanted to make for so many years. And I think he was trying his best in his own way to make the best of it.
It's pretty amazing. He was offered to do Raiders of the Lost Ark with Spielberg, and instead he went off and made Venom instead.
Actually, it was amazing. He didn't say anything nasty about Spielberg in his book at all. As a matter of fact, he said, I'd like to work with him. But he said, I'm being offered a little bit more money to do this movie. I'm going to go do this one instead. And he said, they're both shitty scripts anyway, so what difference does it make? That was his attitude. I think it was just... But I think for all of that, it was a little bit of, the lady doth protest too much. I think he did see the artistic merit in it. But I think that, ultimately he wanted to keep in the good things in life because he did come from a poor background too. Although that's somewhat controversial too, because it could be that his background wasn't quite as horrific as he made it out to be in his book. I think some of that was exaggerated too.
Yeah, he probably didn't come from such a miserable background. You can see a portrait of the whole Kinski family in his book. Poor families in those days usually couldn't afford to take photos like that.
I don't think that they were swimming in money, but I think they had enough. I think if he did have a hard time, and I believe he probably did have a hard time later on when he started out as an actor, those first early years, especially after the war. Of course, he was a POW during World War II, and I think he did go through some very lean times then. But I think when he wrote his memoirs, he was really romanticizing how awful. It sounds like something out of Charles Dickens. It's like David Copperfield, his childhood. I don't think it was quite that.
What do you think is Kinski's greatest screen performance?
It's difficult. I go back and forth, but I might go with Wojciech, the Herzog film. I love him in that. I think that is such a heartbreaking portrayal of a downtrodden man who is just absolutely pushed to murder and insanity. You can't help but feel sorry for him. I loved his Dracula in Nosferatu. I thought he was extraordinary in that. My favorite film that he was in is Aguirre, The Wrath of God. So, yeah, the Herzog stuff is very high up on my list. But other things that he did that I, run the gamut, I thought he was fantastic in his small roles in For a Few Dollars More and Dr. Zhivago, for example. I loved him in Venom. I thought that was a fantastic performance. It's frankly a better role than he would have had in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So there you go. The Great Silence. He's one of the most loathsome villains in history in The Great Silence. It is such a terrifying performance, and I'm only sorry that he never did dubbing for those films. The story goes he was willing to do it if they would pay him some ridiculous amount of money. Otherwise, he would say, no, I'm not going to be bothered. Now, if there were a few films that he did where it was part of the contract that he had to do it. So, for example, on the movie Grand Slam, great heist movie he made in the late 60s for Giuliano Matado with Janet Leigh and Edward G. Robinson. His voice is on the English soundtrack, so they must have had that worked into the contract that time that he would do his own dubbing.
Well, he's dubbed even in Herzog's films, so it's very strange.
His voice is on the soundtracks of Wojciech, I'm pretty sure, was done with direct sound because it's very much like a stage play. I think they pretty much got direct sound with that. His voice is on the English and German soundtracks of Nosferatu and Fitzcarraldo, but his voice is not on the soundtrack of Aguirre or Cobra Verde.
Why is it that his voice isn't dubbed in Cobra Verde?
Cobra Verde, by that point, Herzog had had enough, quite frankly. He said that there was a point in the filming of that movie where he realized that Kinski could no longer be controlled, And he said at that point he wasn't going to work with him anymore. So I think once Kinski finished his scenes, Herzog was happy to be rid of him, and he didn't try to get him back to do it. On Aguirre, he wanted him to do it. That was their first film together, of course, but again, it was just Kinski was unreasonable as far as the money was concerned, so they decided, okay, we'll just get somebody else to do the voice.
His life is pretty much shrouded in mystery those last years after Paganini.
It was a pretty bad time for him because Paganini had not gone well. He had poured so much of himself into that film, and I think in his mind he had probably created a masterpiece and nobody could appreciate it, and I think he probably was doing a lot of self-pity during that time. It was known that Kinski was not an alcoholic, but he did drink on occasion. He probably was indulging in other substances as well, as I've said. And I think he had burned a lot of bridges with a lot of different producers and companies that wouldn't hire him anymore. So I think he had just reached a point where he just didn't care. And I think he was probably just doing, if I had to guess, probably just doing a lot of soul searching during that time and not sure where his career was going to go. But unfortunately, you know, he pushed himself so hard, and he was only in his 60s, but you know, his heart just gave out. He pushed himself too hard, and he was found dead in his home, and that was the end of it.
I read it was the adrenaline shots he was constantly given to suppress his schizophrenia that apparently affected his heart.
I had heard that. I don't, you know, I'm sure that that's probably true too. I mean, it's sad. He had attempted suicide. I think it was in the 50s, and he had been confined to a sanitarium for a while, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
So he was diagnosed as early as in the 50s.
Yeah, I believe it was in the 50s, and he, you know, unfortunately he had problems that were beyond his control. I got a quote from Herbert Lom. Obviously, unfortunately, I never had an opportunity to speak to Lom directly, but one of my contacts did, and Herbert Lom worked with him in a number of films in the 60s, and he said that Kinski loved animals and hated people, and when they were making a movie in Marrakesh, they were staying in a hotel, and apparently cats would come in and out fairly free. And at one point, they were all at the table waiting for their dinner, and the waiter was coming with their food, and a cat walked in front of the waiter, and the waiter kicked it. Kinski saw that. He got up from the table, and he proceeded to beat the waiter and said, "If I ever see you kick another cat again, I'm going to kill you." So he loved animals, but people not so much. But he did love his son. I know he loved his son. He talks extensively in his book about his son. He doesn't talk about his daughters very much by comparison, but he does talk about his son. He adored his son. And of course, his son plays his son in Paganini as well.
Well, maybe he had matured and felt guilty and wanted to make up for the lost time he didn't give his previous children.
Maybe he felt some guilt about that. I don't know. Maybe he saw in his son something of himself, and he felt as if he was not loved appropriately, so he wanted to make that up with his son. It's hard to say.
This whole very conscious lapse into B-movies at the end of his career has always puzzled me.
I mean, he did B-movies from the start. I mean, he made his name doing the Edgar Wallace Creamy films back in the 60s, where he usually played the shifty butler or the red herring that, you know, everybody thinks is the killer, but he ends up getting killed halfway through the movie. Those were B-movies. I mean, they were good movies, but they were B-movies. He did the occasional bigger film in the 50s, like A Time to Love and A Time to Die for Douglas Sirk, but he just had a tiny part in that. Obviously, doing Dr. Zhivago was a big deal, even though he's only in one scene, but it's a memorable scene, and that's all it takes. You can win an Oscar for doing just one scene, you know, if it's a big enough scene. So I think Herzog elevated him at a certain point, and Kinski would never wanted to admit that, of course. He hated the fact that so many people saw it that way, but I think it's true that the Herzog films gave him an artistic validity that he might never have had otherwise. he started doing some big films. He did a movie for Billy Wilder in 1980. He did, various different bigger level movies. But then I think he rubbed too many people the wrong way, and the stories started getting around that he was unreliable. So it was mostly after a certain point in the 80s, it was only the B movies that would employ him.
I still remember the horrible spaghetti western where Kinski plays a messiah-type character who is just released from prison at the beginning of the film and ends up taking horrible revenge at the end of the film. I think it was called And God Said to Cain, directed by Antonio Margheriti.
He made some of the worst spaghetti westerns, and he made some of the best. I mean, he was in For a Few Dollars More, and he was in The Great Silence. He did a really neat one called The Ruthless Four that I quite liked. But, he did other ones like, Black Killer, which were terrible. So.
Oh yes, have you seen that alternative happy ending of The Great Silence, where Trentin Jan's character suddenly reveals a robotic hand and turns the table on the whole situation? It's one of the most ridiculous endings ever made.
I think that was Sergio Corbucci's sort of FU to the producers for insisting that he come up with an alternate ending just in case, because the movie is incredibly downbeat. I mean, evil wins. I mean, there's no question evil wins in that movie. And it's a very, it makes me emotional every time I watch it. I get a little bit teary-eyed when I watch the ending of that movie between the Morricone score and the choreography of that ending and Trentin Jan's very soulful expressions. Oh, it's a heartbreaking ending. So, yeah, they said, well, you have to film a backup ending just in case. And it was.
Did they use that crazy ending in some of the theaters?
They used it in some territories, I think in some like South Africa and even in some of the smaller Italian provinces. I think it was used. Fortunately, not very much. And the ending most people know is the one that was intended. But yeah, they have this ridiculous happy ending where somehow Frank Wolf has survived being in this, falling into the frozen pond, and he comes back and helps him, and he has this mechanical it's ridiculous, and I'm sure Corbucci only did it that way because he didn't want it to be shown.
Do you know if Corbucci said something about working with Kinski on that film?
Funnily enough, I haven't found anything as far as that goes. He didn't work with Corbucci again that I can think of off the top of my head. As far as I know, that was the only one that they did together, but I never found any quotes from anybody. I've never even really heard Trentin Jan talk about that film. And obviously he's had such a distinguished career. I don't know if he regards that as an important film or not. I never read any quotes from anybody. The actress Vanetta McGee, who made her film debut in that, I never saw any quotes from her about it. I don't know. It's a curious thing. It's a great film, but yet it seems as though it kind of was forgotten for a long time, and probably during that time, a lot of those people passed away. I mean, Trentin Jan is still with us, obviously, but Vanetta McGee is gone, and Kinski is gone, and Corbucci is gone. Frank Wolf died not that long afterwards. He killed himself. So a lot of the people involved, maybe during that time frame where it was kind of forgotten, maybe that was, when they all passed away, and now it's too late to ask them about it.
Kinski is really great in The Great Silence. If you think about it, he's very low-key. He doesn't do much in it.
Frightening. He's legitimately frightening, and I think Corbucci knew how to film him. He knew how to use his eyes, which were so incredibly intense. And Kinski was a great minimalist as an actor, and that's not to say lazy, but he understood that when you have a close-up, and it's projected on a theater screen, it's very big, and you don't really need to do a lot. He registers very, very strongly. And like I said, unfortunately, the sad part of it is that movie in particular has a very bad English dub. And I prefer that one in Italian with English subtitles for that reason, because I just think the English dub is not really up to par. The actor that plays Kinski's voice isn't particularly good. It's a shame, but just watching him and seeing what he's doing, and watch him at the end of the film, how cold he is and how just hateful he is as he destroys this silence character.
Yes, but still, even though he had this charisma, he was still a character actor, a type.
For the most part, yes, he was a type. I think that can be said of most actors, to tell you the truth. I mean, there aren't many actors who really are different all the time. Daniel Day-Lewis is one of the very few people I can think of who every time you see him, he seems to be somebody different. But on the other hand, how many movies has that man made? He's made maybe a dozen movies, whereas Kinski was in, 150. So you do become a type, and I think that's true of just most actors. Christopher Lee or Boris Karloff or Al Pacino or whatever. You become a type. But he could break away from that, and you see him in the occasional film where he plays a sympathetic character. He plays a very very sympathetic character in the George Roy Hill film with Diane Keaton. I can't remember the title now off the top of my head. The Little Drummer Girl. And he plays a character role in that, and he's very sympathetic. And he did it very well. And if he could only be crazy Klaus and villainous Klaus, then he never would have been able to do that. I mentioned Double Face before, the Ricardo Freda film that Fulci had a hand in writing. He's an ambiguous kind of hero in it, but nevertheless, he's the good guy, and we're with him, and I think he does a very good job in that as well. So, I think he knew what was expected of him, and he would deliver just the kind of manic, crazy Kinski performances. That's what they wanted. But on the other hand, I think, well, Herzog, look at Fitzcarraldo. Look at what a charming performance he gives in that. The humor and the warmth that he gives in that film. He had it in him to do more, but very often, yes, these, particularly the B movies, they just wanted him to come in and scowl and sinister. The reason I took the book on basically was just to say, okay, we know that he was apparently very difficult. We know that he had mental problems. We know that he maybe wasn't the nicest guy, but let's be honest, he was a great actor. Let's look at the films that he did and try to get some sense of his accomplishment and what he left behind. He made a lot of films, not as many as people have said. Herzog keeps saying he made 250 movies, something like that. That's not true. Closer to something in the realm of like 120. That's still a lot of movies over the space of, 40 years, 50 years, however long it was that he was acting. So that's a lot of ground to cover. It's a lot of movies to cover. Some of them are awful. The only thing that's worth watching in them is Kinski, but that's a constant through each and every one of them. He's always worth watching.
Och med de orden så var det slut för den här gången. Jag heter Henrik Möller. Musiken är skriven av Testbild. Hej då.